Way to start your day.
For fees, they're going to fail to prepare. We are compromising the futures of these children.
This is the Situation Room. The only way to start your day.
The following takes place from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. every weekday on Spice FM.
Baba should disown these experts and they say they went there on the because he keep on telling us that these experts you came from Dubai and you found them there already at State House looking for jobs.
Government has to has to introduce austerity measures. It's something that this government and the previous ones have not been able to do in this country. We've talked about it so many times.
And really, I think you have seen the modus operandi of William Samoei Ruto since he came in. It's just showbiz.
This is the Situation Room. The only way to start your day. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi. This is the Situation Room. The only way to start your day.
A very good morning to you. 8 minutes after 7 o'clock. Ndu and Joe with you this morning as we get into our conversations for today. The governor for Kakamega County, Fernandez Baraza, will join us in a short while, and we'll get into a conversation with him, and we'll be looking at, who's courting the West, in this case, the West of the country, and what development looks like versus a vendetta, if that actually is a thing. We'll be having that conversation with him when he joins us in a few minutes to get into things today. And, Joe, even before he does, I just look at all these things that are happening in the country at the moment, and it just seems that you think that you've packed it so tight, but you still always find there's always something that keeps coming, and it keeps coming at you. And I saw a comment from somebody who says, do you cover like, for example, the drama festivals? Interestingly enough, we do, from the very beginning, when they are at county and the extra sub-county, and then they go to the regional before they get to the nationals, because the nationals is the end of it, right? And so if you'll find that we do actually cover, and yes, we do know that some of the scripts that came out for this year's festivals, that we know that they are doing the nationals now, but this started way back in September. And some of the scripts that came out actually were muffled and that were not allowed to make it to the day. So the ones that you see on the national scale are the ones that people said, okay, fine, maybe we can let this one slide. But there's a lot that didn't come out, but that there's an expression that the people of the nation have. I don't know what will be birthed from this. That Kenya seems to be in a place where there are labor pains, and this is a protracted labor. And that it seems difficult at the moment. But the good thing in all of this is that there's a birth. There is life.
That will hopefully come out of it.
That will come out of it. But it just seems that there's so many difficult things at the moment. It's not your health committee saying the other day that SHA is unsustainable.
No.
As a system. It's not your 66 billion shillings hole in the education sector. It's not that, you've got two insult-wielding individuals who give us, who are, keeping us audience to their little spats, and that people have to be audience to this over and over again, and then you wonder, okay, so can we just get some work done? It's not whether in the Ministry of Interior that there's a alleged 60, I don't know how many million, whatever tender scam. I mean, whichever direction you look at, there's just one thing too many that's going on that shouldn't be. And then in all of that, you disappear, man, on Friday night.
And you see, we have to start looking at our country. And, there's a book called Shamba la Wanyama. It was more of a political analysis of the then times, as the author would have had it. Or the Chinua Achembe's books,
Yeah.
We need to go back and see, how do you yarn together a political fiber, a social instrument, a social order that takes care of all elements that are meant to be catered for.
Yeah.
Here we keep talking about the public policy. Public policy is basically what the government should do. Make sure you are safe. Make sure you can eat good, healthy, quality food. Make sure we pay our taxes because we also have a civic duty. Make sure we have order. Or as you like to put it, make sure we are safe. The government should just secure us in all aspects. But all these things we are saying are just a pronouncement of how insecure the country continues to become. Financially, when you hear about loss of money, physically, when you hear about abduction and mass graves being discovered, and also socially, when you see that the social amenities, education and health are not being well taken care of. There's just a lot happening every day. We wake up to a story, that sends chills down your spine. But we have to ask then, what will all this, as you say, give birth to? What will we do as a people, as a collective? Because we have to agree, we only have 2 million people who work in government, or actually people whom we call government are only 2 million people. If we are 50 million, 52, so what happens to the 50 of us?
Right.
What action are the 50 million of us willing to take to make sure that we are all relatively secure, safe and secure?
Those are the questions. And I mean, it sounds almost ridiculous to say, but you know what, Joe? That you shouldn't have to wake up on a Saturday morning or a Friday morning to a piece of land where there are bodies that were allegedly dumped by a GK vehicle. It sounds absurd, but you shouldn't have to actually do that.
No.
And for you to ask the questions, okay, under what circumstances did this happen? That bodies have been mutilated. And you're right, actually. How do we know that they were 14 if they've not all been gathered together and then found out? Who are these people? Under what circumstances then were they captured, collected? Under what circumstances was it deemed fit that they be butchered? Because from all indicators, that is what happened. That we shouldn't have to wake up to such news. That you shouldn't have to wake up on a Sunday morning to the news that an individual who's been fighting in the courts to secure his property, for whatever reason, the politics or whatever notwithstanding, you shouldn't have to wake up to that reality that it's very possible that you could be because that is the reality that people are dealing with right now. And so people might say, don't politicize it. And I actually agree, don't politicize it. But you should socialize it because it could happen to you.
Yes.
And you have to ask yourself that in what could I just be picked up because I have an opinion? Could I just be disappeared because I have something to say? Could I be disappeared because I am of sound thought and mind and want to express what it is that I'm saying? Could I then be picked up? The same way you shouldn't have to wake up in Kericho to bodies mutilated and buried is the same way you shouldn't have to wake up to the reality every day that you could also be snatched up. We're saying that those are two totally different, far removed issues, but they're in the same spectrum of the social justice that we talk about. You shouldn't have to deal with any one of those things. So by one pales in comparison to the other, it still is on the same axis when it comes to what are we dealing with as a country? The same thing that we are talking about is it sounds crazy, you should not have to bend over and try to get water out of the ground that you can't see through for you and your family to drink. It is the same axis as you shouldn't have to wake up in Kericho to find 14 bodies mutilated, buried in the ground. Same axis.
Same axis.
You should not have to listen and be captive audience to a health committee that tells you this social health system that we're operating on to take care of Kenya's sick and ill is not sustainable. Same axis. You shouldn't have to wake up to that. And you know what? In all of these things that we're talking about, my dear, it's the basics. We're not even talking about complicated infrastructure. No, we're talking about life, we're talking about health, we're talking about education, we're talking about food. Maslow says those are your basic needs. And you see these things that I'm mentioning, it's not far removed complicated things. It's that you can be alive and not in the ground in Kericho. It's that you can be healthy and not drinking water out of the ground. It's that your children can go to school and that we don't have an education crisis or that the education system is about to fall apart because somebody has failed to allocate the money and actually implement the use of that money. It's that. You shouldn't have to spend 104 billion shillings to set up a system that does not
doesn't
work.
After losing 11 billion, you
Come
out
on.
and say it's not sustainable.
And that we should not be fed to this theatrics of two people insulting each other every time they get on a podium. That's what we're talking about. There's work to be done, man.
And I think we as a people have failed ourselves because we also have to take responsibility. These people did not just find themselves where they are. We may not have known how they look like, how they smell like, and how they talk when they're angry. We may not have known. We may not have known how incompetent they are. You know, we may not have known how much they could not coexist for the goodness of the nation. We may not have known, but now we do know.
Yeah.
So we as a people, what are we going to do? Because we failed ourselves unknowingly. It would be now catastrophic to repeat the same mistake across board. And I'm talking about your MCA, your governor, anybody in the department, anybody in the ministry, anybody in the agency, anybody that we have employed as a country, as a people, that we pay salary through our tax. It is our mandate now to start thinking as a people, how do we redefine the person we deem fit to hold office? How do we redefine the quality and the character and the traits we want to see from a public servant? You know, from a public officer, from a civil servant, because that becomes what we have to deal with for 5 years.
Yep.
What you're dealing with now, these are the decisions we made in 2022. In a record, almost 69 point something weeks, the days are going.
They're going.
We had 70 Sundays before yesterday.
Now
we
we
have
have
69. In a record 69 Sundays time, we are going to have another opportunity to make a decision. I know in between there's a lot of time and a lot could happen, but we need to continue taking notes so that by the time we get to that very important day and date, we are able to make a very sound decision that will secure our next 5 years. That in the next 5 years, we'll not talk about abduction. We'll not talk about food shortage. We'll not talk about floods. We'll not talk about bodies being dumped and people disappearing. That we'll be here talking about how the renaissance of the country is happening, how we are manifesting a new Kenya, a modern nation where we as a people can sit around and say, oh, since we're able to cater for the basics, can we now go the innovative way?
This is what I'm saying. That in the moment whereby these things seem to be the things that plague us over and over again, you know what? You have no business dealing with some complex second level things where the basic foundation has not been achieved. I don't care who says what about innovation and infrastructure development and all of those things when you have hungry people. For me, it doesn't work. That there's a reason why in my mind, and somebody may tell me, Ndu, you're playing with Lego in your mind, and I say maybe that's the best way to work. There's a reason why there are schools in certain countries in this world whereby they don't start by giving you the numbers and say count from 1 to 100. You know what they do? They put you over there and they give you blocks. And they see how you're going to put them together. But usually, you know what people do when they put blocks together? They start from the ground. I have never seen somebody build a house from the roof. And when you see a crack in the building, I have never seen what are those people called? The manager of the construction. There's a contractor, whatever the case may be. The foreman. I've never heard that they say, okay, well, you know what? There's the roof and there's a foundation, but there's a crack in the wall. How about we sort it out from the roof? I've never. The only thing I've ever heard them say, and I've read it in books, and I've actually seen individuals who said this, they said, you know what? We have to take it down and fix the problem from the foundation. I've never heard it differently.
But in Kenya, a governor will tell you they tried to stop construction of a building that they knew was not meeting the structural requirements. It collapses, it kills people. You see, like how we've been reduced to accepting things that really we should not be having a conversation around. Needless to mention, I think in Eldoret and at some place in Westlands, we have 2 buildings collapse in the last 1 week. But these stories, much as they get some attention, we don't get to ask ourselves, like, how do we get to protecting the sanctity of life? Because you need to just feed, keep somebody safe, have them good, decent shelter, and cover them with clothing. Those are the basics you're talking about. As a nation, we should be able to take care of those basics. But we keep on benchmarking on other projects Fine. I embrace the infrastructure development. I embrace the SGR coming and extending to Kampala. But please, let there be drainage.
At the very least.
At the very least.
Yeah.
Yes. Let there be order. Let there be social order. Let us feed ourselves first. You know? Let us collapse all these education menace we keep having in the name of bursaries, and I'm glad that the governor is here. He may shed some light on that. And we have a better, well-organized, public-funded education system. The same goes for universal health coverage. You know, the whole shisha now has become a CISO. We are losing resources, and needless to point, we are losing people, we are losing lives. So there are conversations we need to have about how to reset back to our basics and make sure that we are able to drive our country forward.
Absolutely. And everybody asks the question, with all these things that we are seeing in the meantime, is an answer in the vote? 100% it is. 100% it is. How you choose in the future then actually depends on how much further we can complain about some of these issues. Karibuni Sana, thank you for joining us this morning. And as we cut into our conversation today, the governor of the county of Kakamega is here with us this morning. Fernandez Baraza, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Karibu Sana Mheshimiwa, how are you doing?
I'm keeping well.
Karibu.
Asante.
You may not have known, but you were brought in by another Baraza.
Okay.
Yes, she's also Baraza. And so I guess she never brings people today, but she brought you in today. Perhaps she will introduce herself to you later.
Yeah, very well.
We're glad to have you in the room today.
Yeah,
thank you for joining us. In the time that we do have left, we'll then be able to go into some things. But we want to start off with today's proverb. As you know, we go to a different African country every week. This week, we are in the West African country of Guinea, a former French colony. Small population of just about 12.4 million people, and still very French for all intents and purposes, but trying to make its way because it's one of what they called the Axis of West Africa, who told the French, we're not going to deal with you anymore. This is the proverb that we share from Guinea today, and we love your interpretation. One camel does not make fun of the other camel's hump. One camel does not make fun of the other camel's hump.
I think that's a good one. It's just like there's an equivalent proverb in Kiswahili that says nyani haoni kundule.
You're going to have to do a translation for me. I know nyani is a monkey.
Yes.
All right,
yes,
okay.
Yes. Yeah, actually what it means is you should not throw stones when you live in a glass house. Yeah, because sometimes what you do, what goes around comes around.
Right.
That's what basically it means.
Indeed.
You should not start throwing stones, and yet you also have issues around you.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a great one, I think. And it's interesting how we can always take those proverbs and apply them to politics in one way or another. So there's a political agenda, but there's also the development agenda. And that coming off of the president's tour in Western Kenya last week, there was a cry, Governor Baraza, and that the people of Western said, what is it that's being done for us? And it seems that now political presidential tours have been about what goodie bag is the president carrying that perhaps would then be applied to us that we can cash in for the vote. Is that the case?
Actually, when I look at the presidential tour to the Western region, what I can say is it was very successful because specifically in Kakamega, there are specific tangible projects that he was commissioning, inspecting, and launching. We have a 2.2 billion water project in Malava sub-county. He actually did groundbreaking 15 months ago. So what he did was just to come and do inspection, which for me is a good thing. I also do inspect projects that I've launched. That's number one. Number two, we have affordable housing.
Okay.
In Kakamega, there were completed units, around 250 of them, which he was handing over to beneficiaries. Again, that is tangible. On the same front, he also did a groundbreaking for another 2,000 units. Again, very tangible a project and impactful. Come to markets, there are around 25 markets that we are constructing in partnership with county government.
Okay.
the county buys land, and then the national government will bring money. So far, almost 4.4 billion has been allocated for markets only. Again, those are very tangible and transformative projects.
Okay.
Come to roads. We have bitumen roads, which is doing almost 170 kilometers in Kakamega. Very tangible project. So for me, I look at it like it's just doing the right thing.
Okay.
And as a politician, when you have initiated a project, you must go there and do a follow-up, not just sitting back in the office.
Okay.
So it's not really politics per se, but tangible projects which are impactful to the society.
Then if they're not political, it's interesting because government is, as people have said, extremely bloated. That, of course, government being the greatest employer in the country, that there are many people, that there are departments, there are cabinet secretaries, there are people who fall under the ambit of some of these projects that you've talked about. You've talked about affordable housing, lands. You've talked about roads. You've got a ministry, an entire ministry. You talk about water. All of these things have government employees attached to them. How do you separate that these are not political tools to curry the favor of the people? In this case, as a Western bloc, vis-a-vis to be extremely interested in the development of any part of the country. Many would say it's not his job, but that he's doing it to politicize it and to cash in on the vote.
One thing I can tell you is, as the chief executive of the country, I think it is to his interest that he goes to inspect those projects. By the way, when you look at, even as a governor, that's what I do. When I've done something, I go there and do a follow-up. That is the only way you can be closer to the people, because it is the people who elected the president. It is the people who elect a governor. So at the end of the day, when you're now doing your report card, at the end of 5 years, you can say, look, you give me a job to do, and this is my report card. But before then, you cannot do a report card when you are not in touch. And that's why you'll see him naming all the roads, because he has been there. So it's a different kind of presidency, I can say. This is a guy who is on the ground, as opposed to the previous president. I remember, like, the former president, he only came to Kakamega twice in 10 years. President Uhuru Kenyatta, former. But Ruto has been there several times. So I think, for me, it's just people getting used to his style of leadership, of being on the ground with the people. So there's nothing absolutely wrong, in my view.
Well, thank you, Governor. We as a country, we have a constitution that gives you a mandate as a governor on the scope of things you are supposed to execute. And same applies to the president.
Yes.
Say if you are, for the fact that you are beneficiary of the presidential tours in your region, but one would want to know, constitutionally speaking, is this how it should be? Because we gave ourselves our new constitution so we can walk away from the likes of presidential decrees where a president would come, and if in good terms with the president, back then you would have had development. Today we have a constitution that gives us equity, that provides for disbursement of funds even to the counties equitably so that development can be dispersed. And as Ndu says, a lot of these functions are devolved. You talk of agriculture, you talk of health, you talk of water, you talk of roads, they're all devolved. Is this how we should be operating as a country?
What I can say is, I know we still have a challenge on making sure that all the functions which are supposed to be done by the counties are actually devolved, costed, and transferred. We still have that lacuna. In the meantime, when you look at issues of roads, for example, counties don't have a budget to do bitumen roads. I've been struggling with quite a number of roads because we don't have the allocation. When you look at the issue of healthcare, healthcare is indeed devolved, but up to level 4. What the president and myself we are doing in Kakamega, we have a level 6 hospital. This is a national government function.
Is it finished?
We are almost done. By end of August, it will be done. County had put in 2.6B. The national government is put in 1 point. Actually, out of my intervention because it was as far as the project. Come to the stadium. Again, the former governor was very ambitious. He put up a very huge stadium called Buhungu, 40-seater capacity. Almost 6 billion Kenya shillings. So when I came in, I was like, wait a minute, this is a national facility. And looking at the amount of money that's going to be put in there, you will not do anything else. So I talked to him and said, look, I want you to support here. We have some programs. Even the Constitution allows collaboration between the county government and the national government. For example, the industrial park, county aggregation and industrial parks, where we are collaborating with the national government. So where the Constitution, of course, allows collaboration, pursuant of Article 187, we do collaboration. But we still have a bigger conversation around transferring functions which are indeed devolved, but they're still being done by the national government.
And so it is on that point, Governor, that I raised my question that you also have the Council of Governors.
Yes, COG.
And you appreciate that, yes, there has been a bit of stifling of devolution by the national government, where functions should have been followed by funds. That is not primarily the case.
Absolutely.
So when we see the president now coming to assume functions of the county government, much as there is collaboration therein, we tend to question the position of the Council of Governors. Why not seek for more, not funds first, but function? Why not seek for more affirmation of the devolution concept, so that in future, because the government operates in continuum. You say very well, the former government of Kakamega, he did very well to initiate the level 6 hospital and the stadium, and now you have taken it up and you're hopefully going to complete that. And depending on how the people decide next year, another administration comes in. Why not seek to affirm devolution? Because I think this would enforce equitable distribution of our resources. Today you benefit, but quarters where the president is not in good books with them, then they may be deemed to be missing out on development. We create an imbalance, which is merely just doing what the Constitution does not allow.
Actually, we've been on record, brother, in terms of pushing for making sure that the functions which are supposed to be devolved are indeed transferred to counties. And the first step was to do costing. Through the IGRTC, the Intergovernmental Technical Committee. We've done costing amounting to 274 billion. Those are functions which are supposed to be devolved, but they're still being done by the national government. In our last summit with the president and the Council of Governors, we met in December at the State House, and we agreed we can do phasing of the transfer because you cannot do at once. The first phase was amounting to 65.97 billion Kenya shillings. But what you've seen in the current budget policy statements for 2026, 2027, is that those functions have not been budgeted for. So the first thing is we identified the functions. We did the costing. And then number 3, funds must follow functions. Otherwise, you will receive the functions and then you don't have funds. Again, that's another challenge. So what you have insisted as COG is after the costing and gazettement of those functions, we need now funds to follow the functions.
Okay.
Otherwise, we cannot accept to receive the functions without
the funds.
Yeah.
So this makes sense. How does this all fit in? Because the COG meets and you know what your plans are. Every county, 47 of them, know this is in the next. And you also have the KIPES, like you said, but then you also have the development plans for each county. This is a period where everybody goes through, right? And you also bring in public participation. Everybody has something to say, or is supposed to have something to say when it comes to how counties will spend their funds. But these don't happen in isolation. This plugs into the bigger picture of how the nation budgets, right? So let's take Western last week, for example, these things that you talk about, or the things that were initiated 15 months ago. How do these plug in to the national budget? Because that's where all this money comes from. Money that goes towards equitable share, money that goes towards county function, money that goes towards some of these projects. One would assume is all budgeted for. And the folks who start crunching the numbers every September, before we hear what happens in June, July, would assume that they take all these things into consideration, because we're asking where this money comes from. So when the president goes to Western, he's not making roadside declarations that I'm going to build 1, 2, 3, kind of like what he did in Bungoma during Madaraka Day a couple of years ago. That we are saying that for everything that Governor Baraza has mentioned this morning, this was part of the national budget and not something that sticks politically when the government or when the president comes to Western. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Do all of these projects form part of the national number crunching when it came to budget?
Now, when you look at the budget making process, indeed, the sources of funding the budget are largely two sources. We have the taxes, which are, of course, levied across the board. And then we have external borrowing, right? At the moment, most of the amounts which have been allocated on development expenditure is from the national government. And of course, we have never had a balanced budget. All the time we have a deficit budget. And that is why I've seen the aspect of the National Infrastructure Fund, because the needs are more than the resources you have. Of course, I know the other conversation will be around the borrowing. Our take as county governments is that resources must follow functions. And when you talk about activity-based budgeting, then you must also recognize the functions, the line budgets. And as the chair of finance at COG, we have been very consistent, saying, look, when you are budgeting for equitable share, especially on the vertical allocation between the national government and the counties, don't just a figure and then you just add 5 billion, for example. The baseline for 2026-2027 budget was 415 billion. That was last year's budget. Of course, ending June this year now.
Yeah.
What the National Treasury has proposed is 420. That is not activity-based budgeting, if you ask me, because it's not itemized. We have specific items that we require for purposes of making sure that we implement our programs effectively. Number one, as I've said, those functions which after the summit we agreed must be devolved. And there was even a commitment that those numbers will be included in the 2026-2027 budget. We need to see it there. We have been very consistent, and that is our position in saying it. Number two, we have the health workers. Health is devolved. But we have the UHC workers, universal health coverage workers, almost 6,000 of them. They are working in the counties, but the money they're paid is actually at the national government through the Ministry of Health. After the union fellows went on strike, there was a push for these workers now to be sent to counties on P&P. You can imagine. So you're like, wait a minute. First of all, you don't have the money. You want us to absorb over 6,000 UHC workers, and yet you have not given us the money. So we did specific costing, almost 8.94 billion shillings, for us now to accept those workers. And we said this one should not come in as a conditional grant, because a conditional grant will come in once. And when you look at the way the conditional grants are approved, is political. So we agreed as COG that we need this money as equitable share because we are guaranteed. We are still having a conversation around that.
Well, it's interesting because sometimes when these conversations shift to funds or resources, we lose the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
And I believe for us to experience or realize the country that we desire, or the county in your context that we desire, it all narrows down to the structures we put in place. Yes. Regulations we enforce and how we follow the constitution. So I'm looking at it from a point of wanting to know that, of course, Kakamega County, for example, has needs. Has fiscal needs, you have financial needs, you have budgetary needs that you're not able to meet for you to fully realize perhaps the goals for this financial year. But then a president comes and he says, I'm going to do a road within the same county of 1 billion, whatever figure. If I have $1 billion, I'm going to complete the stadium and the hospital. Can you, as a governor or a county leadership, say, hold on, Mr. President, thank you for the goodie bags you have brought, but whatever you're proposing to do is not the priority. We can use that money and utilize it elsewhere for the growth and sustainable development of a county. Do you have that position? Do you have that space?
When you look at the programs, for example, ongoing programs, as a finance person, it is indeed like a catch-22. When I take an example of our level 6, 2.6 billion Kenya shillings was put in there. So it is to the interest of the people of Kakamega that this project is completed because it's going to impact positively to the economy. So by prioritizing completion, in my view, it is something that is very important because once we complete the level 6, we shall be able to employ over 3,000 healthcare workers. So that is impactful, right? Look at the program of, let's say, Bohongo. Around 2 billion had been put in there. The project was being frustrated because of limited funding. Again, it is myself who said, look, my priority, not just because the counties are going concerned. You can't just abandon what had been started and is impactful. And because of that aspect of being a county existing perpetual continuity, you actually focus on completing those projects. We had level 4 hospital in Butere, sub-county hospital. It was started, not completed. So I'm one of the few governors who will focus on completing the stranded projects as well as now incorporating my new projects in my county integrated development plan. So what I'm trying to say here is when the national government comes in to complete projects which had not really been completed and they will actually be stranded assets, it is a good thing. It is still prudent utilization of resources.
And the question still continues to be that whether you operate as a devolved unit, like the county of Kakamega, and that the national government comes in to help the county sort out itself, because that's exactly what's happening. No matter how you try to color it, that's what's going on. National government comes in and plays a bit of a salvation role when it comes to completing projects. Is the county concerned about where this money comes from? Where do those resources come from to complete this? Because then the question would be, if it's done in Kakamega, will the same thing be done in Garissa? Will it be done in Kwale? Will it be done in Lamu? Will it be done in Makueni, for example? Can that happen? And this is where the political tinge comes in. Void of political awareness, whereby if you say that this level 6 hospital will be completed, questions start to pop off. That was 2.6 billion shillings actually enough to complete the hospital in the first place? And why was that not completed? That this extra money of, I don't know, however, how much did you say was going to come in and complete it?
1.2
billion. 1.2 billion.
Yeah.
Where does it come from? that allocation that the national government comes in and says, we will do it and we will finish, where does it come from? Because then you start to have to ask questions about commensurate balance. That is the money, by your own explanation this morning, goes towards budgeting, tax money and borrowing. Kenya has a debt of 12.1 trillion shillings today. Is that 12.1 trillion shillings commensurate to development that we see in the country? It's obviously not. So you have to start to ask the questions, where does this money go? And as you ask, where does it go? Where does this 1.2 billion shillings come from to finish Kakamega Level 6 Hospital? Where does it come from to finish or to help out in Nairobi? Where does it come from?
Now, first and foremost, we have the national budget that is based on line ministries, right? And one of the things we have been talking about in terms of crunching the numbers is to interrogate the budget in terms of the line ministries. As opposed to counties where you are given a block figure. In the national government, all this money is budgeted for in line ministries. And then where the funds are not enough, I know the CS Treasury under Article 223 has powers to approve budgets so that money is allocated on programs that have come in midway, pending supplementary budget approval by the National Assembly. So we have the two sources. The line ministries, for example, the stadium now, the funds which have come in is from the sports ministry, right? And I'm sure it was approved in the supplementary budget, but before then, we have under Article 223, the CS National Treasury can approve allocation of those funds. But going forward, what we are saying is, if the functions that belong to counties have been gazetted, transferred, and resources associated with those funds taken to counties through the equitable share, we'll be able to do our own things. Number two, the debt financing. We've had a conversation before that in the budget making process under Article 203, national debt is given priority before anything else.
Yes, it is. It's the first charge on the consolidated
the first
fund.
charge. Yeah. So what we are saying is, because some of the programs that we are doing, for example, counties have 70% of the roads. But when you look at the kind of money we are now even given for maintenance, the proposed road maintenance levy is only 5%. So you ask yourself for a minute, how do you allocate 5% to counties to maintain 70% of the roads in that county? So again, those are governance issues because of our political structures. But by and large, it is the highest time that counties also start being beneficiaries of the national infrastructure funds so that we can be able to do our own development projects. But
what about own source revenue? What happens when you talk about conversations about own source revenue, whereby counties actually are economic machines? Because devolution was meant to take development to the corners of the nation. But we seem to still keep going back. So now the government has said, let's have this national infrastructure fund. Let's start, the partial divestiture of, certain companies, right? And that is to do major infrastructure development in the country. Now I'm hearing you say counties also want a piece of this pie, going back to the national function to do things which were supposed to be devolved. What happens to things like own source revenue? Or is that even not something that you can depend on?
When you look at the PFM Act, we have only been given two sources. So own source revenue, really, these are just levies you collect from property taxes and entertainment.
And it can't be anything else. Nobody's ever been creative enough to say Kakamega County, for example, is going to be an economic machine whereby creativity is applied to function that actually exists, and let's see how we can actually start to raise money. Kenya is mimicking a federal system with the counties. But in terms of the economic activity to ensure that these federal units are actually operating with a little bit of help from the national government, it says, okay, well, we can charge people to have a kiosk, or we can charge people to use the road, or we can charge cess when they cross from county to county. But that ends it in terms of imagination. There's really nothing else that happens in terms of own source revenue besides charging licenses. Is that acceptable?
When you look at the framers of the Constitution, I can say those fellows were anti-devolution.
Anti-devolution, you say?
Anti-devolution, that one I can say it.
Why?
The reason I'm saying that is, number one, you create counties, and then you come up with the PFM Act, right? And say, look, because counties are devolved, we still need to control them by a payment system called IFMIS. That for me is anti-devolution, because you want all the payments to be controlled in Nairobi. Number two, go to countries like India, where the national government and now the provinces, they have a percentage of VAT that is supposed to go to those provinces. That is not what is applying to Kenya. So that's what I'm saying. The framers of the PFM Act wanted devolution. Right now, there's even a conversation, right, that counties must also have only a single system to collect revenues, manage the national treasury. What does it mean? That again tells you that we have a few fellows in the national treasury who are anti-devolution.
Yeah, but that element is not in the Constitution. It's not in the PMF. It's something new they want to introduce.
Of course, you know the PFM, they'll go and come up with some legislation.
Yes.
And as we know, Parliament will always approve.
But Governor, you see,
I trust Joe is not going to let go of that last statement that you just made.
No,
we'll probably come to it later, but
we'll
okay.
circle back to it because my position, this is my personal opinion, is that we have the most incompetent National Assembly. So when you say they're going to be manipulated to just approve a legislation that goes against the Constitution about the Public Finance Management Act, I agree with you. If they were competent enough, a lot of fiscal crimes we see, the criminalities we see even around our national debt. We have debt that has been borrowed, but it was not approved by the National Assembly and nobody questions it. But you mentioned the case of India where a bit of the tax goes to the provinces. Even in Kenya we have that because you receive a minimum of 15%, right? As provided for by the Constitution as counties, which that was the sunrise clause. It should have grown to maybe up to 35 if our projection had worked out right. But also you are expected to raise your own source revenue to complement that, which is not commensurate from the reports that we receive, because we see the national government coming to the rescue of counties. We have the example of Nairobi, right? Kakamega as well, you mentioned trying to boost the completion of the stadium and the hospital. But the issues around the on-source revenue are not adequately discussed for us to understand, as a Kakamega County, what new dynamics do you need to explore to grow your fiscal structure?
Very well. Now, maybe the clarification I just wanted to make is besides the case of India,
yes,
besides the equitable share, provinces also charge VAT, right? That's what I meant, not that they don't get equitable share. Also, revenue is a good conversation. What you are doing, for example, in Kakamega, and this is what we have advised all the counties because of a peer review, is to make sure that we do proper automation, because there are a lot of revenue leakages to avoid the cash transactions. That is where we are going to ensure that we optimize on our potential. For example, Kakamega, we have a potential of collecting over 5 billion Kenya shillings.
How much are you collecting now?
At the moment, we are doing 2 billion. So you can clearly see that that potential can only be optimized if we do serious automation. And this is a conversation that we are now telling all our colleagues that, look, when you properly automate your on-source revenue, then it is going to boost. But on-source revenue is just for O&M. You cannot really use on-source revenue for development. By the way, especially for some of us who are coming in as the second
governors.
Where somebody has been there for 10 years, it's very difficult to run a county. First of all, you get staff that is bloated. You cannot sack people. You have those fiscal controls from COB that is supposed to have.
If there is redundancy, why can you not fire people?
Okay, of course, firing people.
Is it political expediency?
It's not really political expediency per se. But the courts, the labor courts are very pro-employees. Yeah, you have to really have a case against staff. I've tried in Kakamega to encourage staff to do VR, voluntary early retirement. Nobody shows up to take that offer. Yeah. So those are some of the issues we are grappling with, which are structural in nature.
Yeah.
But going forward, counties will only be effective if the functions that are devolved are gazetted, transferred, and funds associated to those functions are also transferred to counties.
So if that happened, going into the future, if that happened, then there would be no need, like what you've just said, about then counties having a share in this national kitty now that is the National Infrastructure Fund. If that happened, you wouldn't need to say, also this National Infrastructure Fund, we want a piece of that pie.
When you look at that, there's some functions which you cannot devolve completely. For example, highways. You get what I mean? You cannot devolve completely. Number two, we have maintenance of urban roads, right? Again, you'll find we have an issue there.
What's the issue? Because from what we understand, every time you buy a litre of petrol or diesel and put it in your vehicle, there's a certain percentage that comes out of that for the maintenance and development of roads.
Very well. And that's
around the country.
Yes. You remember I said we have a current legislation that is almost going to be approved by the National Assembly, where counties are only being allocated 5% of RMLF, road maintenance levy. 5% to maintain 70% of the roads. How do you explain that?
Okay. Looking at it from another angle.
Right?
Because the issue of resources, there'll never be enough. There will never ever be enough funds. We need equity. I agree with you, because we need to spur development in a manner that is sustainable. That part I agree.
Yes.
Today, governors, especially because you're one of them, so I'll use you as an example, tend to do that which is popular most of the times. Other than that, what is appropriate and a priority to the county. Could there be a case, in your own opinion, that we have the wrong persons holding the right offices and therefore they're not able to deliver? Because if indeed they were keen on serving the people according to the Constitution, the first order of business would have been to tell the national government, hold up, you have devolved these functions to us. We need to structure how the resources are going to fall. Instead of sitting and waiting 2, 3, 4 years and the president comes and you're on the right side, he splashes some goodie bags and then you'll be okay. But another part of the country is being marginalized, in a manner of speaking. Do you think we have the right crop of leaders serving this country today?
What I can say really on the side of counties pushing for more resources, I can confidently say without any fear of contradiction, we've done extremely well. The only challenge has been, of course, the commitment from the national government. You have not seen it. Yeah, because we also need some political goodwill there for letting go some functions and the resources thereof.
So you need the scratch my back, I scratch your back kind of scenario to play out?
Very well. Because here is a situation where we have done what we needed to do. Earlier, the conversation was, these functions have not been costed. We don't know what to transfer. Then we push IGRTC. We do the costing. The next conversation is, they have not been gazetted. We push IGRTC to gazette. The next conversation is, we don't have 272 billion. We said, we can face the transfer.
Yeah.
Right? After facing the transfer, yes, we'll put in the budget. Come the budget, it's not there.
It's a totally different story.
So those are the issues which we were still grappling with. And I'm hopeful that before the budget policy statement is approved by June, counties will have at least the bare minimum of what we agreed with Baba.
And that brings us back to the National Assembly, which we'll come back and have a conversation about, because they make the law, they make the budgets, and then the oversight. We'll come back and talk. We're talking with Governor of Kakamega County, who is Fernandez Barraza this morning in the Situation Room. It's 8:08. We go into the news. Okay, I guess we're not doing that. Coming back to the news, so we'll just continue. We're just taking a break, and then we'll come back and continue with this conversation at 1:01. Good morning.
102.5 Spice FM. This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day. This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Even have a mediation. Right now, the budget policy statement has only 420 billion Kenya shillings as amount being allocated to counties. An increase of 5 billion only from 415 to 420. Number two, we are talking about roads, which are being maintained by counties. 70% of them. National Assembly has only allocated 5% of the RMLF, which is money collected at the pump, to maintain those roads. So when you look at it, I look at it like this political witch hunt, where the National Assembly will stifle funds to counties, and then because maybe some of them have interests of being governors, they go to the ground and say, look, this governor is not maintaining the roads, this governor is not doing this market, this governor is not doing this, and yet the money that was supposed to come to counties has been put in the national budget. How do you explain a member of parliament coming around and say, look, I have money to do a level 4 hospital. The money is in the budget under the Ministry of Health. Why can we have that money go to counties? How do you explain a member of parliament coming around, because he sits in the budget committee, right? He has money to buy ambulances for county hospitals. So until we get it right from the budget-making process, the oversight, representation, and then you separate MPs. And this is why you miss Baba, by the way. Because he was very clear that MP should focus on oversight, representation, and legislation. But now they're implementers of the roads.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yes. And I hear you loud and clear. It takes me back to the question I'd asked earlier about the crop of leaders we have. Because clearly, and I've maintained this position for a long time, that we have enough. In terms of resources, we have enough. If only we organized ourselves better and managed it better. Is it not really, from what you're saying, a leadership issue? Because within your county, you have how many MPs?
We have 13.
We have 13 MPs. Serving the same people that you do.
Yes.
Right? So wouldn't be, were it now not for political expediency or incompetence, in my opinion, people would come together and say, as a county, this is what we need. So when you talk of legislation and representation, these MPs from your county will be going to parliament knowing, as the budget-making process advances, these are the things we ought to push for our county. Of course, there are other matters of national interest. But is it more from where you stand? Because if the MP can still come with the resources and buy ambulances and build some other development or infrastructure that the county would have if they'd been given the resources, is it that not a leadership issue? Is it not a leadership crisis, in your opinion, more than lack of resources? Everybody is seeking political expediency. Everybody wants to outdo. Some MPs want to outdo the governor because they may have political aspirations. You get? Some governor wants to stifle other people because they want to become a deputy president. What do you think?
Well, I think to a large extent, I can say is the political architecture of the country we have, leadership aspect as it were. Because when we respect institutions, and in this case, we have support for devolution proper, and depoliticize some of those activities, they need to make sense. Because the bigger issue really here is the leadership and the political architecture that we have. We have given so much powers to National Assembly in the budget-making process, to an extent that Senate even has no say on what goes to counties. Yeah, until you, for example, have a stalemate on the vertical share of equitable share. So for me, number one is a leadership issue, and then number two, to a large extent, is also the PFM Act. It has given so much powers to the National Assembly in the budget-making process. Yeah.
But when it comes to approving budgets that would go, for example, to State House, the National Assembly doesn't have an issue, it would appear. When it comes to maintaining, raising the debt ceiling, there is no problem with the National Assembly in terms of how they legislate. But when it comes to counties and how much they then actually attribute towards counties, then there seems to be an issue. Wouldn't you have a broader issue with the National Assembly when it comes to, for example, moving the president? We know the amount of money that it takes to move the president, for example, from Nairobi to Kakamega, keep him there for a couple of days and bring him back to Nairobi, whatever the case may be, or if he stays on, right? And these monies are approved by the National Assembly. There's no coin that is spent without the approval. And that maybe give rise to what you said about, well, the National Assembly approves anything in some certain circumstances. So why don't we see an uproar from National Assembly when the debt ceiling is allowed to get to 12 trillion shillings? Why don't we see an uproar when the National Assembly, because this happens in a continuum, it's not just counties operating over here on their own. This is one big pie that we are looking at here. Why don't we see that kind of uproar whereby we say, guys, this thing as envisioned by the Constitution was to ensure that development reaches every corner of Kenya. So when there's money that is moved from one place to another that perhaps could have better use in another place, according to Fernandez Baraza, in counties, for example, why don't we see that uproar when 17 billion shillings is used by State House? Now, it could go somewhere else. Or when the debt ceiling is 12 trillion shillings and you cannot trace in the last 10 years where 12 trillion shillings has actually gone, I think that's a bigger problem. Why don't we hear the uproar?
Why I see it really, the first thing with regard to the debt, I think we need to have a bigger conversation, an audit of the national debt. Is very important, so that we can really understand what is this 12 trillion. Because 12 trillion is not pocket change.
No, it isn't.
I know in most of the developed countries, debt is not bad, but what is that debt being used for, right? So
What's
the first
bad is when you
conversation-
can't answer that question.
So the first conversation is an audit. And an audit of the national debt really requires political goodwill. Because...
Does it? It requires the Constitution, Governor.
What I'm saying, you remember the first Auditor General, FCPO Oko. He was frustrated to audit that. And the former president said, what's wrong with you? Why are you asking so many questions around national debt? Do you remember?
I do, yes.
Yeah. So the Constitution is there, which gives powers to the Office of the Auditor General. But has it been effective? Because if that national debt can be audited and repackaged, then that would be a good starting point. With regard to the National Assembly, I know most often than not, you're always challenged that you have not defended your budget. And for us as counties, our biggest partners in devolution is the Senate. So once you have convinced the Senate now will go and push the budget. As you know, the Senate must also pronounce itself on what is equitable to the counties. But you will find sometimes Senate will push a number which is not really approved by the National Assembly. And that's why, in my view, we need to relook at what is the role of Senate in the budget-making process. Is it really the upper house? In my view, it's not. Yeah.
Have you governors, the Council of Governors now?
Yeah.
Council of Governors, COG, have you requested or sought to have the public debt audited? Because in my view, if we did a proper auditing and we're able to understand what our obligation remains, I'm sure you would save a lot of money, because the 2.3 trillion we are paying annually is a lot of money. And that money would come back and now bridge the gap. Like now I think you have a stalemate of, is it 20 or 40 billion between what you're being allocated as counties and what you demand, right?
In fact, it's over 100 billion.
Over 100 billion. So have you requested for the audit? Because that now trickles down to affect the allocation in all the other quarters. Have you, as a Council of Governors, in your opinion or to your knowledge, asked the national government to give a proper audit of our national debt?
We have been on record, my brother.
Right.
In terms of calling for the audit of the national debt, because it is not sustainable as at now based on the GDP of Kenya. That is something I remember even in my last presentation to Senate on the same. We were very clear on the sustainability of our debt. And we called for the audit of the national debt, because that will be the first step just to appreciate these numbers. So that one, I can confidently tell you, yes, we have been on record calling for that audit. Yeah.
And response, have you been treated just like the former president treated the Auditor General? What response have you gotten?
No, of course, we have not gotten any response, either negative or positive, nothing.
Silence is communication, you would know.
Well, of course, your guess is as good as mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting that all these different emotions can operate in the same space, whereby you expect something on one side, but then maybe don't push so much on the other side when you demand an answer. One thing that demands a lot of answers also from people who may have done work for the county is pending bills. And what does the pending bill portfolio look like for Kakamega County? You know what the numbers are?
At the moment, the pending bill portfolio for Kakamega is around 1.2 billion. And what you've done really is to ensure that these pending bills have been properly audited and verified. We have a checklist of the pending bills. If there is no documentation of the pending bill, then we cannot pay it. So the verification, documentation is crucial. And by the way, we have a difference between pending bills and commitments, right? Commitments because the projects are multi-year. So you may have, let's say a project is a 4 billion project, but you do budgets for the 4 years. But a pending bill is just for 1 year. So as at now in Kakamega, we have 1.2 B. And we have also made it deliberate that in every month, we allocate some money to sort out pending bills, especially those that have been verified, documented, and approved by cabinets.
Have you paid some in the last 3 years?
Yes.
What was your pending bill balance from 2022 as you took over this year?
When I took over, the pending bill was 1.8 billion. But of course, annually, we also have accumulated some pending bills. Just because of the difference, the timing difference in terms of when you do the projects and then when you get the money. So because of the delay in the receipt of the equitable share, it will arise to pending bill because an invoice is here, you're closing the financial year, but you have not sorted it out. Number two, the fact that the money that comes to counties is never line budget. So you'll always have pending bills. For example, I have bitumen roads I'm doing in Kakamega, almost 100 kilometers of bitumen roads. So when the contractors give you an invoice and then you have inadequate funding, it will now become a pending bill. So you start now going slow in the project. So those are the challenges we have. And that's why we are saying that going forward, we need these functions to be properly costed. When you do proper costing of the functions, then it will inform the budgeting process. In the counties, we do activity-based budget because you have the functions, you have the continuing projects. But now what you get in the equitable share is just a block figure. You can imagine 5 billion are divided by 47 counties as the incremental amount.
Yeah.
And yet we have non-discretionary expenses. We have the union CBAs that we're supposed to recognize and also pay. We have the so-called economic adjustments we're supposed to take care of. So it's really a big issue.
Right. It
when it
seems
comes
to
to
me,
counties,
from where we started this conversation, because we're about to wrap this up now, is that so it really doesn't or shouldn't matter whether the president comes to Western to sort out some of these things. It seems like you have a lot on your plate already that needs to be done, that doesn't need a promise of something that's coming in the future or a launching or commissioning of something, but that for the work in Kakamega, in Bungoma, in Busia, in other parts, to just continue. But that we have these visits, we have these things done, is essentially, for the majority, political. Because the last 40 minutes, you've told us about work that's going on, conversations that are being had between the National Assembly and the county, conversations that are being had between the Council of Governors and other things to be done. You don't need a visit by the president to cement any of this.
Well, that is the ideal situation, my sister. We have the ideal situation and the current situation. The ideal situation is what we are talking about, where funds and counties will be properly resourced. But in the absence of the ideal situation, the current situation is 85% of the funds are with the national government, including, of course, access to the debt financing. And because that is the current situation, you cannot divorce it from the reality. But going forward, as I said, we need to have a bigger conversation on counties being properly resourced. For example, agriculture. Agriculture is a devolved function. National government has no business buying fertilizer for counties. You know what I mean? So those are the conversations that we're supposed to be having.
That we need to have.
And this
is where we have now the IGRTC coming in, in terms of identifying, costing, gazetting, and transferring those functions to counties and resources
For that. So as we wrap it up, quick one. SHA has been deemed unsustainable. I'm sure you are aware of that development. But recently, I don't know if you actually did, but there was an allocation of Facility Improvement Fund to other counties. How much did Kakamega receive for development of the Facility Infrastructure Improvement Fund? And how does now SHA being unsustainable affect the continuous provision of healthcare in the counties? I mean, nationally, basically.
Now, first and foremost, let me comment on the FIF. What FIF means really is that the funds that are collected from the facilities are ring-fenced for purposes of development and O&M issues in that facility. That is the principle of FIF, the Facilities Improvement Fund.
Well, we could have a conversation another time, because when the SHIF was being established, part of the 100 and something billion was to go to counties for Facility Improvement Fund. But a conversation for another day.
Indeed. We want to thank you for joining us this morning. Fernandez Baraza is the governor of Kakamega County. You've gone through a number of things this morning, falling short of saying the ideal and the real. Perhaps what we face is the real. He's laughed sheepishly. But thank you for joining us this morning, Governor. And we look forward to further conversations with you. Asante Sana.
Very well. Thank you very much. Looking forward.
Asante Sana. 22 minutes past 8. We come back and we here talk about the state of education in the nation. We'll do that in a bit. Good morning.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
One of the things that I ended up.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.